I'll be presenting my RAID array and web server that I created. This is for CNIT 176, and I'm Sergeant Shah. Okay, let's get started with the business case of this presentation. The business case allows for storage redundancy for large-scale businesses and corporations in a cheap and easy manner. So, it allows for fast storage with little downsides. And the most important part about this is that it's cost effective. You can use this with as many or as little drives as you feel. The more amount of drives that you choose to have, the faster the storage will be. Because, for example, if you have 2 drives, then they split it into 2 different parts, one for the redundancy and one for the storage. But if you have 3, it's split into 3 ways, 4 ways, so on and so forth, leaving, and 2 drives would be 50%, and 4 drives would be 25% of the drive that would be used for redundancy. So it is, cost effective in that way. You can scale it up very easily. And it's very easy to upload data straight into a RAID array if you have a web server set up, like in our case, and it's accessible from anywhere if your ports are forwarded properly. Expanding on the first point, it's very good for businesses because it requires, I'd say, pretty minimal setup from a CNIT major personally, and still allows for all the things that a business would want from this. Connection to Pi architecture. So 5 different ways it connects to our Raspberry Pi. One, most importantly, is the USB drives. It serves as an input-output device to the USB controller of the Raspberry Pi itself. The 2 USB drives I use communicate directly with it. Another one is the Ethernet cable. It allows the Pi for network access, which is important for a web server. The GPIO pins, although I didn't personally use them, they allow for power management, and you could build off of these pins by connecting LEDs to them and coding it to show the current status of the RAID array. If it's online, offline, if it's fast or slow. So you could configure those however you wanted to in the case you use them. SSH shell. So I personally never actually use a Pi connected to the monitor. I always SSH into and worked off my laptop because I found it easier and more efficient. And file management. Our RAID array talk to the file system of the Unix and of the Pi to work with it and utilize it. Our procedure, we had 7 steps. We had to install Apache 2, test it, install the web server, which is WordPress, PHP, MariaDB, and format and initialize the USB drives for RAID, set up the WordPress server with the database, and then install the file plugin. So we'll go more into detail with those. First of all, we had the Apache 2 installation. This is pretty simple. I just did, use the package manager apt built into Debian, which Raspbian is run on. Sudo apt-get install Apache 2, did everything for me. Typed the IP address into my browser, loaded up. One note I will say about this is that most modern browsers, I personally use Arc, it defaults to HTTPS, just for modern security reasons. But our web server is not secure, so it won't load. It'll time out. But if you get rid of the S, if you do HTTP and put IP address in, it should work perfectly fine. After that, I went on and created my WordPress. So I did wget, pulled it off the WordPress website, and then the WordPress website downloads as a tarball. So I extracted that tarball by using tar xzf, moved it into the Apache folder, ran all of that. After that, I did the WordPress. I moved on to the RAID array itself. So I ran ls-blk to see where my drives were stored and what it's labeled as, and then I followed the guide. It told me to run fdisk on the first drive and then the second drive. But as you can see here in the red, this disk is currently used, blah blah blah. And I keep trying to go through the guide, and on the last step it said fail to remove partition room from system, device, or resource busy. And that happened to me on the second drive as well. So it's throwing me 2 errors, and I was stuck on it for a while. But then I looked at the mount point and it said it's busy, but nothing's used. I'm not transferring files into it currently as I ran these commands. But I thought that was mounted, and that seemed like a red flag to me. So I tried unmounting them. I ran these as sudo because it's more low level because it's talking to direct hardware. So I ran sudo umount, and I put the location of it, which go to the previous slide. The location is right here. So SDA1 and SDB1. So I did sudo umount, which stands for unmount, SDA2 and SDB1. Like you see, the mount point is completely gone then. It goes empty for both of them, which means it worked. So I ran fdisk again, and it all worked out perfectly. After that, I started creating the actual RAID array because the fdisk initialized the disk to be used for the RAID, and now I use MDA DM to actually create the RAID array. So I made my directory where I wanted the RAID array to be. So for me, it was in the /mnt RAID0 directory, and I ran the instructions that were given to me. As you can see, it was first forming it as the ext4 format, and that went all good. And I started mounting the devices to dev MD0 where I'll be creating the array, or where the array will be stored, I should say. So I first created the array, so I started it, mddm create, and then it said continue creating array, which I went through it, and then I started it as well. So for the results of that, we can see over here I have the lost and found directory. At the lost and found directory, all it really says is that, okay, like your RAID array has been created. It's a directory that should be created by default every time you create a RAID array. No matter if it's RAID 0, 1, 5, 10, that directory should always exist. And if it doesn't, then you probably did not create it properly. And the screenshot directories here, or here it's var www html wp content RAID 0. Over here, I made it at mnt RAID 0. So I'll talk about the troubleshooting problem in a couple slides, but the reason is I recreated it inside the Apache 2 server so that my plugin could talk. I don't have a screenshot of this, unfortunately, but so the plugin could talk to the actual RAID array without having to mess with permissions, just to make it more secure. So the RAID 0 would automatically have the same permissions as the WP content because it was a child directory of it. So that's what you can see over here. It's owned by www data on the group and the user side. So that's just a little note on the side if you're confused. Next up, we have a WordPress dashboard, showing that it was successfully made. So right here, welcome to WordPress. It's the default screen. It did make me authenticate with my credentials, and my database and everything was loaded up. As you can see, I did load it on my laptop instead of the Pi on my MacBook. And I just found it easier, put the IP address in and load it right up. I use a PAL 3.0 network and load it straight up. User page, this is just showing the permissions. So there's only one user, Sarge, which is me, my email, and I'm the admin. I did not add any, other users, but if wanted, there's the added new user button. I can just add who I want. And for the file server, actually, I went to the plugin section here, and there's a plugin called WordPress File Manager. So I installed that. I changed the default directory to WP content RAID 0, WP content RAID 0, sorry. And then every time I load it up, it'll just open me the RAID array with the lost plus found file. And if I could drag into my browser and it would upload into the USB drives. Troubleshooting. So there's one major error. There's some smaller ones as mentioned, the unmounting of the disks and permissions. But the main one was that every time you shut down the Pi, the installation would kind of corrupt itself because of how the RAID array was created in the guide. And that's because it used the name of the RAID device rather than the UUID, which can change, but the UUID can't. So Professor Heide posted a fix for this, and I followed it. It just involved, finding the UUID of your specific disk and change that in the configuration file. So the third paragraph, you can replace the UID with our value, and then after that, if you reboot, it did work properly. So that was the main thing that needed some fixing. But after that, it worked smoothly. On startup, it would mount. I boot into my WordPress server, it would still be there and it would work smoothly. Lessons learned. I learned to only use the root and sudo user when needed, especially as a cybersecurity major. Root and sudo hold a lot of power, like more than we think, and something that you should not try brute force through. Like if you got a problem, you shouldn't try to root through it or sudo through it. You should learn what's happening and only use sudo when needed, because it could lead to some bad consequences later on. I also learned the use of terminal and the Unix operating system. I learned how terminal connected with the hardware and how they communicated. And I also learned how the file system of Unix worked and the permissions with it. Coming from Windows, Mac OS and Unix work pretty similarly, but Windows in particular works very different in the file system. Um, so the hierarchy of Unix, I learned the permissions along with it because in Windows you only have the admin, but Unix it's sudo and sudo user, which is different on how it operates. And I also learned to integrate the web server with the system files as they communicate with each other. And that is my project. Thank you.